All right. I think this is working. I hope it's working. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet and our one person in the studio audience today. We are here for our weekly interview and performance series. And today we have our very special guest is the great bassist and composer and educator, Heather Chriscaden. And so we're going to be doing an interview here for about 45 minutes, and I'll open things up for questions. If you have questions for Heather or myself, please let us know, either in person or via comments online, and we'll do our best to get to them. I'm, again, facilitating everything here, so if I see your comment, great. If not, maybe post it twice so I can get it for you, but we'll do our best to answer them. So, well, let's get right into it. Oh, also, I also am aware that there may be some sound issues with like some white noise underneath, so we're doing our best, so hopefully you can hear everything okay. So anyways, Heather, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so well, I know you're a bass player and educator and all this kind of good stuff, but you were originally from the Northwest and then left and then back again. So for people that don't know you or your playing, can you talk about how you got started playing music and where that began?
Well, I grew up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I started actually on piano and clarinet, and I wanted to play trombone. My parents wouldn't let me. I think they honestly couldn't afford the trombone, but what they told me was, it's a boy's instrument, it'll make your lips go big. So what happened was I was actually playing piano there were two pianists in the 5th grade or 6th grade stage band, and no bassist. So the band instructor said, hey, you guys know how to read bass clef, who wants to play bass? And I went, oh, me. And just purely for the fun of it seemed like an interesting thing. I had no idea how much I would fall in love with it. And I didn't tell my parents until they saw me at the concert. So all of a sudden there I was playing electric bass with a stage band. And then we didn't have a string program at my school. I went to Stevens High School, and there was no strings there. So I didn't get a bass until my senior year of high school, and I think it was my sophomore year of high school where I first saw Ray Brown live, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to sound more like that. So.
Well, going back earlier, was there, prior to piano and stuff with school, was there a lot of music in the house? Were your parents musicians? Did they play? Was there music on a lot?
There was a lot of music as a soundtrack to our lives, I think. My mother played piano when she thought we weren't listening. She was very shy about it, but she could play some. And my dad could play a lot by ear. He didn't like to read music, but he could play really well by ear. He played piano, and he played a little banjo, he played accordion. And then my dad's mom was very, very musical. She was a really wonderful singer and was always singing around the house and was in musicals and things like that.
So in terms of like records or things that your folks listened to, what was kind of in heavy rotation when you were growing up?
There was a lot of classical. My dad was pretty eclectic. He liked a lot of things like Charlie Daniels Band and all over the map, Eagles, that kind of thing. My mom was more classical, and the jazz really came more from one of my dad's brothers. I mean, I knew right away that I loved jazz because I just loved those harmonies. But my parents didn't really listen to jazz. My grandmother did, a little bit, especially the older stuff.
So between your father's brother, if I understand correctly,
yeah,
and your grandmother, did they kind of steer your listening or say, oh, you should check this person out or check that person out? Or?
My uncle did, for sure. I have an uncle, Howard, who he would let me come over to his place and go through his vinyl. And he would kind of hand me things. Like I remember him giving me Oscar Peterson and the Bassists with Ray Brown and Neil Fleming, Oscar Peterson, and things like that. He would kind of toss things my way after he took this out.
So, okay, jumping back now to your first experience hearing Ray Brown. I mean, for those that know, we all know. For those that don't know, he's one of the zeniths of the instrument and the music. So where did this occur, and who was Ray playing with at the time when you first heard him?
It was at the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival in Moscow, Idaho, and it probably was 1987, and I'm pretty sure it was the trio with Jeff and Gene.
So for those that don't, Jeff Hamilton and Gene Harris. Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And do you recall, I mean, I can remember for me, I mean, certain concerts that just made a massive impact, and I remember, stuff that they played and all that kind of, and how they played it. Anything jump out to you in that recollection?
I don't remember what actual tunes they were. No, I just remember I was sitting way up in the bleachers, and I actually literally got a nosebleed during the concert. Yeah, I think for me it was all just kind of tunnel vision right on your A as you started hearing that sound. Even though it was in the QB Dome, which was a little bit echoey, it still Ray even comes through in that situation.
And so this was, you said, high school or no?
Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school.
And you'd already been playing the electric bass for how long? And did you switch over to acoustic at that point? Had you already been playing acoustic?
No, I hadn't been. Okay. I had no access to one. So that's when I started really wanting to play the acoustic. So I had played the electric since 5th grade. So, about 5 to 6 years. And I really loved the role of the bass. I loved being in the background, but playing a supportive role for the whole group. But I wasn't in love with the sound of the electric bass, and that has a lot to do with I just hadn't been guided to a lot of the great electric players at that point.
That's what I was going to ask, is prior to having the Ray Brown moment, as many bassists do, when you were playing electric, I mean, obviously you said you weren't super fond of the sound. Were there any recordings or bands or bassists that you did like on electric, or not really at that point too many?
I don't think I got introduced to those things until after, I was pretty much just doing whatever I needed to do for the school groups.
Okay, and you said Lake Stevens, so this was Lake Stevens High School, correct? Okay, and at that time when you were coming up, I always find these types of things interesting. Other musicians that were in your sphere of influence, that were in your classes, are any of them gone on to become musicians or continue to play that you're aware of?
Yeah. I wouldn't say. I would say there was Josh Wolf, who was a great piano player. He's not with us any longer, unfortunately. So we played in their jazz choirs together. He played saxophone for them. That might be the only one I can think of on the scene. I can't leave anybody out.
Growing up in Lake Stevens, out that area, in that direction, were there any, aside the opportunities to play in school, were there any places where you could go and hear jazz in the immediate area, or did you have to go other places, Seattle, Olympia?
Yeah, I had to come to Seattle. I mean, back then, I'm probably dating myself, but this was back before Jazz Alley was remodeled. So the big thing I would do is, that was when they had standing room on the stairs. So our trick was to wait until they were full, and then show up, and then they would let you do standing room only on the stairs, and they wouldn't card you, so you didn't have to show ID. So I saw a few shows that way.
Well, let's go with that. So, because those, I mean, for when you're learning how to play, or even when you're a professional musician, there's some shows that you see there are super impactful and life-changing. So I'm sure you've seen some of those. So what were some artists? We've already talked about Ray Brown and that trio, but other artists that really inspired you to keep going and grow as a musician?
Boy, I think I saw Monty Alexander trio, and then Ernestine Anderson. She was a favorite. I think I saw her several times at Jazz Alley. Those were probably the biggest ones for me, besides Ray, of course.
And so now you mentioned the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival. So for people that don't know, it's a massive, and I don't know if it still is, but international jazz festival. They bring artists from all over the place. So I'm sure you went and it's a competition. So you competed as a student, right, or as a school ensemble.
Yeah.
And they also have wonderful clinics and workshops that you can attend. And aside from, you saw Ray Brown's trio, but I know they have lots of other artists too. So did you see any cool workshops or other musicians that you enjoyed checking out at that time?
Oh, my memory is so bad for things like this. I actually got called up on stage with a Ray Brown clinic, and John Clayton was there too that year. That was an experience, and that led to a private lesson with him, which was pretty amazing. I'm pretty sure I saw Brian Bromberg there one year. When I was in high school, I didn't get to see much of the clinics because I was in two different high school groups, and we were running the whole time. That's all I can think of right now.
That's fine. Yeah, I was just curious. So after high school, what ended up happening? Where did you go? What did you do? And why?
Well, I actually ended up I started my college at Edmonds Community College because at the time my ultimate goal was to be part of the sensation group. I auditioned for voice and bass, and I got in as a vocalist. So I did that. I was there for actually 3 years, mostly because I just enjoyed. I think I graduated with classes and credits as I needed with my associates. And then I went to Washington State University and did my bachelor's in performance, and they were very generous with me and allowed me to do my studies half jazz, half classical in my recitals. And I studied, at the time they didn't even have a bass instructor. So I was studying with the cellist, Christopher from Bayer. I guess I should back up and say that while I was at Edmonds, I studied with Doug Miller privately. So he was kind of my first serious double bass teacher.
So was this before he was at University of Washington then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I learned a lot from him. I did the Port Townsend Festival a couple years. The first year it was John Clayton and Todd Kuhlman, the two of them. And Todd was a hilarious storyteller. And of course, John was an amazing teacher. And I really learned a lot from that week. I'm really inspired from that.
I want to let's focus here on Edmonds for a minute. So you're at Edmonds. You're with Doug Miller. Anybody else on the faculty that, aside from Doug? I mean, Doug is great in and of himself. But
Yeah. I mean, well, there was Rick Marcy, who was doing the choirs, but also is an amazing arranger and just an amazing musical mind. And then also at the time, they were restarting the jazz band, and Brad Allison was directing that, and he's phenomenal as well.
wonderful. And so while you're at Edmonds now, much closer, well, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure about the geography here, but Lake Stevens to Seattle, Edmonds to Seattle, I'm assuming it's a little bit closer. Doing any playing with any of your peers in the college or getting down to Seattle to go into any sessions or play? Were there any local musicians, aside from the people that you're studying with, that were impactful to you?
I think I didn't really get out and do sessions. I think I was too shy and too new at everything at the time. But I did play a lot with the drummer Tim Turner, and that was great. I was really spoiled to have a beginning basis to be able to play with somebody like that. And I think because through Fort Townsend I met Noel Reebok, and so we did, he was really good at kind of getting people playing and doing small sessions, not like out of the club band.
So you're at Edmonds, and you said you spent 3 years at Edmonds, or was that at WSU?
Yeah, I spent 3 years at Edmonds and then another 3 at WSU. And again, graduated with 560 credits. I love taking classes.
And I know many people, while they're going to school, they'll, at the same time, begin teaching lessons and playing gigs and that kind of stuff as well. Were you teaching at that time as well, or?
Yeah, I taught, while I was at Edmonds, I taught some private piano lessons. And when I was at Wazoo's, I was working half-time, but not so much teaching at that point. But I also had some wonderful playing opportunities there. Zach Matthews had just left to go down and study with Clayton, and so I kind of slipped into a lot of things that he had been playing for. So I was playing once a week at Rico's, the club in Pullman, which is still there. Yeah. So I got to play with Brent Jensen and David Hagelgans and Joe Colville on drums. And at the time it was Anthony Taylor on piano, who was actually a phenomenal clarinetist, but also a good jazz pianist. And we did that once a week, so having a weekly gig right away when I was still pretty young at the bass. And then I also got to play with the faculty jazz quartet and with a group called Crosscurrent, which is partly faculty from Washington State University and part from University of Idaho. So that was really amazing too.
Can you talk a little bit about, because both of those schools have a long history of jazz education, can you talk about who was on the faculty at the time of University of Idaho and WSU? Was Greg Yasinitsky around at the time, or is that pre? Okay.
Yeah, Greg Yasinitsky was there. He was sort of the head of the jazz, as far as I remember. Obviously directing the jazz bands, and Dr. Charles Argosinger was there he did theory and other things, but he was also the jazz piano guy, and I studied jazz piano with him and did my bass with the cello guy. And then I'm forgetting his name. He just retired and moved to Hawaii. Drummer Dave Jarvis. Yeah, thank you. So that was the jazz faculty at the time. No basses, not a lot of other horn players.
Okay, so Edmonds, WSU. Really quickly, I'm going to go back to Edmonds. Probably still WSU, but did you? I'm assuming, because I know this is also just like for my own selfish reasons, just like chronologically getting into the history of jazz in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest. Did you get over to Seattle much just to hear groups play? I mean, you mentioned Jazz Alley, but I know that there's a huge history of great players and musicians in Seattle. Were there anyone, you mentioned Ernestine, any other folks that you got to go see and play, like local musicians that you enjoyed?
I followed Doug around to what he was playing with sometimes.
Is that New Stories, or was this pre-New Stories quartet?
I think New Stories might have been at the end of when... I know I heard New Stories, but I can't remember if I was still at Edmonds or if it was when I was coming back afterwards. I'm not sure about my chronology there. I know I went and heard the Fuller Miller Williamson trio. And they brought in a lot of guest artists, it's not local, guest artists to the jazz festival, and so I got to meet people from out of town that way. I got to hear people like John Bishop, of course that's, Mark Diaz, and then there were Floyd Stanford, Edmonia Jarrett.
Woody Woodhouse, maybe?
Not really. You'd think so. I don't know how I missed out on that. But
Okay, all right. So wrapping up at WSU, what happened after WSU?
So after WSU, I got a grad assistantship at the jazz department at University of Oregon to do my master's degree. And I was supposed to go there for theory and composition, And when I got there, I changed because they just gotten approved for their jazz major for the master's degree. So they let me switch to that, and that's when I started doing more teaching of bass. That was part of my dad's teaching some of the bass lessons and doing combos. So yeah, I was there for 2 years to do my master's degree. I was the first person to get the jazz master's, which was probably good and bad in a way, because they were still trying to feel out exactly what was required and all that. So I was kind of beginning to,
Was there? I mean, I know nowadays. I mean, there's seems like a fairly strong jazz scene in Eugene. Was there at the time that you were studying there? Was there places to play and other musicians to play with?
Yeah. So I played with some of the other students. I played a lot with Freddie Koenigsberg and Jason Palmer. I believe Toby is teaching there now, teaching jazz piano. And also Carl Boybeck, who's taught jazz history and is a fine piano player that plays in Brit. There were others, and then sometimes I would go to Portland and play with some people there too.
Well, that's that was the next question, was being so close to Portland, or not that far away. So obviously, I'm assuming there was the Mel Brown dynasty was in full force at that time, correct? Yes? No?
I couldn't tell you. I know I saw Mel Brown. The first time I saw him was at Del Valle. Now that you mentioned it, I don't think I actually saw him in Portland. It doesn't mean he wasn't there.
I think someone mentioned, I guess late 80s, early 90s-ish, Leroy Vinegar was in town. Were you around for that? Yes, no?
No, I missed out on Leroy Vinegar. Yeah.
So who was around in the Portland sphere of influence?
Oh, boy. What's his name? Dave Friesen, Rank Porter,
well, then we can always do comments later. Oh, yeah, by the way.
It'll come to me later, yeah, as we're talking. Guitarist who was just here.
John
Dan
Stoll?
Family.
Oh, Dan Family. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the drummer, Gary Hobbs. So those are some of the people.
Was who else is down that way? Alan Jones. Was Alan Jones around at the time?
Yes,
Okay.
Alan Jones was around for sure. There was Dan Balmer, but then there was also Bassist.
We'll get him later.
It'll
That's
come
okay.
back.
That's all
It'll
right.
come back to me.
All right. So Eugene for a couple years and getting a master's and teaching and playing. And so after Eugene, what ended up happening?
Well, then I went back to Seattle and was making a living just playing music and teaching private lessons. And then I started to shadow one of my favorite teachers. Because going back through all this, my ultimate goal really, my ultimate job was teaching music theory at Edmonds College. I wanted to go back and teach there. And that's why I ended up getting my master's in the first place. So I was shadowing Al Galante, who was an amazing teacher. Anybody who I know who has gone to that school when he was there always goes back and talks about how much of an impact he was on them. So I would follow his classes every once in a while, and then we would have lunch and talk about pedagogy, and he would give me assignments. He'd hand me a stack of books on theory, and say, okay, take a look at these and come back and tell me what you like about the material and the order and what you think of things. And then unfortunately, he got really sick with leukemia, and when I asked him if he wanted to cover for his classes, he said, yeah, I would. And I said, well, what if we couldn't get Heather? And he said, get Heather. I was so tough. And then that ended up, it wasn't a long battle for him. And So I covered his classes for the rest of that school year, and then they did a search to fill the position, and I got the job. And I did that for 3 years. I was tenured there, and I was there, I think, 5 years total.
And so now you're back in Seattle, and you mentioned you're playing. So what? Because again, I'm also trying to like catalog the scene and what's going on. So this is early '90s, mid '90s.
This was, I think by the time I moved back, it was about 97.
Okay. All right. So and this is when I'm just starting to myself start to come on the scene and play and go to the sessions at Tula's and stuff. So what venues were around and where were you playing at the time?
Tula's was a big one. I played a lot with Joel Rubach and Tim Turner, and then I also, one of my favorite trios to play with was Gary Fukushima and Eric Eagle. So we had a trio that played a lot. And then everything else was just kind of sketchy quick tune, I think. So we played at Tula's a lot, played at Roxy a lot with Joel. Sorrento was still going back then.
New Orleans, Patty Summers.
Those were all going. I think I only played at New Orleans maybe once. I went and saw other people. I remember seeing Mark Murphy there. That was the first time I ever went.
Trying to think of other venues that I'm aware of at the time that maybe. Anyways, okay. So teaching, playing in Seattle, and then from there.
From there, I went to New York. And I was there for, I think, about 2003 or 2008.
And so teaching, playing.
You know, when I first went out there, I thought, I'll see if I can get serious about the playing. So this would be an opportunity for me to kind of take a little bit from teaching and really try to play. And I did that for a bit. I went out to some sessions and I picked up some work. There's a really great bassist named Nikki Perrott who kind of took me in and kind of literally gave me the shirt off her back. I remember she had me over to her place at the very beginning and was like asking me questions and telling me what sessions I could go to, and she's like, and by the way, I have all these clothes, you know. So, I got some good clothes from her, and then she passed me a lot of work too. So she was starting to do more jazz and a little bit less of some of the klezmer and other all-women groups that she had been with, so she kind of pushed me into the arena a little bit and got me started. I ended up playing a lot of klezmer. I had never played klezmer in my life, but it was a blast. And some jazz and some classical here and there too. And then what I realized was that I loved the music, and I didn't necessarily love the life. I didn't want to stay up till 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning. And of course, there's always the scheduling, which is always in flux, and not knowing whether you're going to make your rent from month to month. And so I ended up making the decision to go back to teaching, and I started teaching private lessons, mostly piano, some bass and some cello. And that ended up becoming a very full-time thing. And that made it, I still played some, but it made it more difficult to play because if you're teaching, after kids get out of school until 9 o'clock at night, it's kind of hard to take gigs in these days.
I understand 100%, 100%. I'm curious your opinions about, being heavily involved with the scene here on the West Coast, and heavily involved with the scene on the East Coast for so many years. Because some people then move to New York for a couple years and move back, but you were in New York for quite some time, enough to really get your thumb on the pulse of what's going on. For you, did you notice any big differences between the two scenes? Maybe it could be through the lens of just the way the musicians behaved and treated one another, the music business side of things, what's expected on gigs. Any big differences between East Coast versus West Coast for you?
I think the music itself, it has a different tone to it.
In what way? I have strong opinions about this, but I'm curious because I've never been to New York other than the airport. I have a lot of friends that live there, and we talk about this a lot, but I'm curious for you living there for so long. How would you, describe, for me it's more like, I'd say it's like an energy thing, and it's hard to put it into words,
Yeah,
but I'm curious.
It's definitely harder, more intense energy. And for me, I love all kinds of jazz, but my favorite is really pretty straight ahead swinging. And for me, so my favorite club was Smoke. That's where those guys hung out. And that was kind of the only place that I really knew of that was really that straight ahead. Everything else was much more modern, a lot of more straight kind of grooves, a lot of mixed meters, modern composition.
Well, in this time period too, musicians will know what I'm talking about, but people, this is kind of like the golden age of the Young Lion era. Everyone referred to as Young Lions,
Oh, yeah,
I don't know if they still, but that was always a big marketing thing that you'd see in all of the publications and online stuff as it kind of became more and more prevalent over the years. But can you maybe talk about that, or your experiences with that, or thoughts about that? Obviously it's a marketing term, clearly, but any thoughts or opinions about that?
I didn't come into contact with that section very much. And I knew it was there, and I should say, Dizzy's, of course, is another, Edmonton Center. Those are also great places for the straight ahead stuff. I don't know why, but I ended up being more in contact with the people who played more avant-garde, not necessarily free or what I would call pet shop jazz so much, but still more modern composition, more type of players.
So speaking of that, out here before you moved out there, guys that are more, I guess, like compositionally minded and forward thinking, people like Jim Knapp, or even I guess you could kind of look at it like Gary Peacock was out here for a long time, or someone that was here that moved out there, Michael Bezio. I don't know. Did you know?
I remember Bezio.
Yeah.
He was here.
And he's, I see his online stuff, and he's always seems to be going along, the direction that you're talking. So did you see any of those folks when you were here or out there?
I knew Bezio here, and met Jim Knapp here. Got to play. I think I just played one rehearsal. I don't even know if I played a concert. But that stuck with me. I remember really loving his arrangement of Green River. But yeah, his arrangements were great. I didn't run into a lot of Seattle folks out there. John Yukon, who I knew of here and out there. Of course, he's with Ingrid Jensen, so I got to know her pretty well too. I think of other West Coast / East Coast folks.
Well, just obviously, differences in the music. I've talked to a lot of folks about just the pace of life. Obviously, out there it seems much faster, and here it seems more slow motion. And even when those folks come out here, we are who we are just by nature. And so after living in that environment for so long, you don't even realize that everything is super fast. Then you come out here and everything is super slow, and vice versa.
Yeah. And just so much going on at once, which if you step into Manhattan, you know exactly what that feels like. It's sensory overload completely, and some people thrive on that, and turns out I don't. I always knew that, but that really drove it home.
Did you find just a shock to your system moving out there from the West Coast?
I had a complete culture shock. I didn't know how to do anything out there. I didn't know how to go grocery shopping. I didn't know how to do my laundry because there was no laundry in the apartment where I was. There wasn't a parking lot at the grocery store. So he was like, okay, how do you get your groceries home? Yeah, and it was pretty rough, honestly. My first 6 months to a year there, I was pretty depressed, honestly, and it was a complete culture shock. And then I started to figure things out.
Keeping it on the time so I don't monopolize all of it with my questions. So what brought you back to, after you said 19 years on the East Coast, give or take, yes? What brought you back to the Northwest?
Family, largely. I think there was a period of about 3 years where I went through every major life change, mostly themselves. So change of jobs, moving, relationships, definite family. Um, and so I ended up out here right before lockdown to help out with my father, who was not doing well. And I had just lost my mother about a year before. And, it just ended up staying. I was with taking care of my dad for about 2.5 years. I wasn't alone. I had a lot of help with my brother and my those four things. But that's what brought me back. But as soon as I was back, I was like, yeah, this is home. I think this will always be home for me.
And so now you're teaching and playing and multiple bands and projects going on. So, and sounds like you're splitting your time between here and up north. I mean, so what's what's going on now? What are you doing?
I'm kind of trying to figure out what I'm doing. Just doing a little bit of playing, a little bit of teaching, a little bit of writing. For the playing, I've been doing some brushes and bass with Greg Williamson, who's going to be here with us today, and playing with some big bands, including the Jazz Conspiracy big band up north, and the Tony Boy All-Star big band. Sometimes I get to sub with the Emerald City big band. I've been playing for Dave Brookings' Blue Street Voices group. And I get to play with Taryn Victrice, so I get to have between Taryn and Greg, I get to play with two really wonderful drummers a lot, which is fantastic. And then I've been doing some playing with Brent Jensen, James Findlay, again, Danny's with me, really bad. That's another person I met early on when I was at Edmonds with Danny Colton.
Now, I only know Danny post-Boxleys, so let's talk about Danny pre-Boxleys.
Oh, the same. Go, 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 go. High energy. He was notorious for breaking piano strings. He's always played that hard, I think. Yeah.
Well, for teaching, are you doing any associated with the program, or just all private lessons at this point, or what does that look like for you?
Some private lessons. I still have one piano student actually from New York who's doing junior lessons with me still. I've been lucky enough to do some clinics in schools. I'm outside high school. I've got some things coming up with Newport. I've got some workshops at Homer's High School.
Now, I want to open this up for questions, but I always like asking this, particularly to guests that are women in the workforce, particularly in jazz. We talk about this at length, but I think it's super important for people to hear this, and I want to know your opinions about this. Being someone who is a working artist and in teaching and performing in, let's be frank about it, a male-dominated kind of just crazy thing that the music business is. Your opinions about that and things that you have to experience. Can you maybe speak to some of the hardships or things that you personally have to deal with or have dealt with?
I haven't experienced the hardships there, and I'm probably not the best person to speak to that. I've always grown up being kind of one of the guys, and I don't really think about it. I love being a bassist. I get to play with a lot of people who are much better players than I am, and I just love playing great music with nice people, and it doesn't really matter to me what their gender is or anything else. I think the funniest thing, a couple funny things in my experience, was when I was playing in the jazz band at Edmonds. For a while there, I was not only the only girl in the band, but I was the only blonde in the band. So we got a lot of blonde jokes. But there wasn't any negativity about it. It was just all in good fun. And the only kind of weird experience I had as far as being a female jazz player was I got a phone call once from a guy, I don't remember what his name was, but he was a singer. And he wanted to hire me because he said there were so many female singers with all male backing groups that he wanted to have an all-female backing group. And that really didn't feel good to me. I don't want to be hired because I'm a woman, because I'm female. I want to be hired by people who like my music. And so I just said, oh, well, thank you. That's an interesting idea. Good luck.
How about from this perspective, growing up in the time that you did, learning how to play, not only as a student but as a professional musician, do you find that there are more female musicians now participating in school ensembles and professional groups than there used to be?
Definitely, I think in professional groups. I'm not sure about, I don't think I have a good pulse on the educational. I hear stories about still having an issue with girls dropping out in greater numbers than guys. I'm not sure why that is. But I see a lot of female musicians out there. And a couple other names I should have said before. People who I played with when I was here before, and now I'm back again, still playing with, is Anne Reynolds and Cody Stone. I love them too, those two. I remember when I was coming up and learning to play, I didn't have a lot of female role models, but it didn't matter to me. Like I said, it was just about the music. But I do remember my mom looking at me once and saying, why don't you have any heroes who are weak? And I just thought, well, I don't know. I like Abraham, I like Clayton, I like,
Well, and it's funny, it brings to mind the comment you made earlier about, well, the trombone's a boy's instrument,
right.
I mean, that's just what I was thinking,
there was, maybe some bias, but obviously it didn't stop me.
Good. Well, at this time, I've barraged with enough questions. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Heather at this time, online or in person? Not yet. Let's see if there's anything I missed anything online. There is one question. Does your bass have a name?
Oh, yes.
Would you care to share the name with us, or is that
My bass's name is Gus, or Gus, named after the portly mouse from Cinderella. You have to remember I was in high school when I gave it this name. A lot of people named their string instruments after women because they have curves. And I thought, well, my bass is not a girl. He's curvy, but so yeah.
Very good. All right. Well, if someone wanted to get in touch with you in terms of like private lessons or gigs or things of that nature, where can they go to find out more information about you and how to connect?
The easiest might be Facebook. Yeah. That's probably the best. Just look me up on Facebook and message me. But make sure you message me and not just do a random friend request, because if I don't know you, I might not.
And are you accepting more students at this time?
Sure, yeah.
And you're still teaching. You're teaching bass, and you're teaching piano and theory.
Yeah, I think theory, ear training, and beginning cello.
Yes. The question is, where do you teach from?
Well, I spend part of my time in Marysville and part of my time in Maple Valley, so I'm kind of in two different locations there, but I can also do a lot of Zoom lessons.
Yes. Other question. And the question is, what was your favorite city in the world to play in?
Oh, I think the best experience playing-wise in a foreign city was maybe Krakow, Poland. Krakow, however you say it there. And that was just because of the situation. It was a klezmer festival, and I think that was the first time I had been in a place where they had lots of venues going on, but in the evening they had an outdoor venue. And to be playing in that venue with people hanging out of all of the buildings really into it was a pretty amazing experience. So that was a lot of fun.
Hang on, let's see if there's any other questions. Can you talk about your opinions and thoughts about audiences in other countries and their response to live music and jazz and other things versus here?
My experience is that they, a lot of times, as a whole, are much more in tune to it and much more appreciative and thoughtful about it. There are people like that here for sure, especially in smaller pubs where they're coming specifically for the music, like places like Foxy's. But there's also a lot of venues here where you're playing and you're really just background. And maybe it's because was never a full-time musician in another country. Maybe they have those kinds of venues there as well. But the places I did get to play at in other countries, it was definitely much more of an attentive audience.
Other questions? Let me check them too. Nothing going on. Are there any countries that you have not yet been to where you would like to go and perform?
Oh, there's a lot. I actually have not spent a lot of time in the European countries. I think I've performed in Poland. That might be the only European country I've performed in. I performed in Japan, performed in Colombia. But yeah, so there's a lot that I'd love to. I'd love to go to Norway. I've been to Norway, but I've not played there, so I'd love to go and be part of the music scene there, even if just for a couple of days.
All right. Well, before we start wrapping up here, any other questions from members in our live studio audience? No. Any other questions from anyone online? Okay. Then I'll ask you this question here that I like to ask all of the guests that we have. If someone were coming to you now in 2022 and asking you your thoughts and opinions or advice about becoming a professional musician or just a musician in general, what are some things that you found personally helpful that have helped you grow and be a better musician that you would impart to them that you feel are very important?
I would say just do what you love, because that's going to be the greatest payoff. And, be open to everything, but don't feel like you have to specialize in everything. Be open to everything, stick with what you love. And as far as advice goes, take it all in, see what works for you, and let the rest go.
Excellent answer. Any upcoming projects or shows or things that you'd like to mention coming up in the near future?
Let's see, look at my calendar. Hopefully some more brushes and bass. I know that there's going to be, not until April though, the Instrumental Ladies of Jazz with Anna and Cody Stone and Eric Eagle. Is going to do one of the jazz fellowships. I've got a lot of festivals and things coming up, but not a lot of big concerts coming up right now.
Can you talk about the Brushes and Bass project a little bit?
Yeah. So one of my favorite people to play with that I knew of back when I was here, but had never talked to or played with 30 years ago. I used to go here and play all the time with Greg Williamson, and I got to play with him last February. First time we played together, first time we talked, and just hit it off on every level. And so we've been doing Brushes and Bass with just the two of us sometimes at home, and sometimes with different guest artists like Jimmy Findlay or Brent Jensen, and yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being our guest today. Thank you for all the insightful words of wisdom and experiences. And for anyone that wants to know more about Heather, like she mentioned, get in touch through Facebook. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you for our sponsors for helping making this possible. Again, that's Museum of Glass, Ted Brown Music, KNKX, Tacoma Creates, and Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray, and Titusville Cars. certainly not be able to do this without your guys' support. Thank you for joining us in person if you're here, or joining us online in real time or after the fact. We're going to take a very short break and then do a quick line check and come play some brand new music for you. So stick around. Thank you so much.